Welcome to part 2 of reasons why people stay in the ICOC. Staying because of your spouse. You're afraid that your marriage is going to fail if you leave, and especially if your spouse is not ready to leave or doesn't have any desire to leave. This can apply to any religious group. It doesn't have to just apply to the ICOC, but any organization which is very controlling, very manipulative, that you would consider to be a cult. It can be very stressful and overwhelming to think about because now it feels like your entire marriage is on the line. And the last thing you want to do is ruin what you already have, especially if it's already been tainted by the cult. So before I go into giving you guys a little bit of advice from my own personal experience and things I've learned being a married woman who left the ICOC 2 years ago, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience and how I was able to leave, even though I knew I was risking having my marriage fall apart. So when I decided to leave the ICOC, I honestly didn't really think too much about my marriage. I kind of know how my husband is. He's very reserved, not as sensitive as I am, in a sense where he doesn't take so many things so personal. Things don't affect him the same way they affect me, but I knew that by me leaving that was going to be something that was going to affect him. So I knew that if I were to leave, that he would either come and tag along or he would want to stay, and then our relationship would just really completely be just probably ruined. So when I told my husband I wanted to leave, first I told him the situations that were going on in the church, how it was bothering me, and research that I found about the church that just really made me suspect that there was definitely something off about the ICOC, and I did not feel right. It didn't make me feel comfortable. It didn't sit well with me. After I told him all of these things, he supported it, he agreed, and he said, well, you know what, if you don't feel comfortable and if this is how they're doing things, then I don't mind. Maybe we could find a new church. Also, it made it a little easier for me to leave because months prior to us actually leaving the ICOC, my husband had already started thinking about visiting other churches. So in a sense, he kind of was thinking about leaving too, but it wasn't so much because he thought it was a cult. He just didn't feel comfortable in terms of the relationships in the church. He didn't feel he could connect with anyone, and that is a very important thing for him when it comes to churches. I left, and my husband followed me out. I don't really know to this day exactly what happened, but I have a feeling that someone probably said something to him, and whatever was told to him was something that made him suddenly just flip off on me. Like one day we were on the phone and he just completely flipped out and lost it, and he was upset because I wanted to leave and was telling me that I should stay because I should follow him because he's my husband. I'm supposed to submit. At this point, he sounded like a completely brainwashed idiot. I was like, you're the reason that I'm leaving because people who think like you. I was just upset. After that, things kind of just calmed down a little bit, and then he left with me, and I told him, I said, listen, I'm not telling you to leave. All I'm saying is I'm not staying. So you do what you want to do, but I have to go because I can't take any more of it, and I am definitely not staying just because you want to stay. The whole thing about being submissive to your husband if you're a wife and leaving, it kind of feels like it contradicts because you're saying that you're submitting, but at the same time, if your husband chooses to stay in the ICOC, then it's like you're not submitting. This is something that I hear from a lot of married women who tell me that they want to leave, but they're afraid to leave because they're afraid they won't honor and submit to their husband. And this is something I had to deal with too. When you're part of the ICOC, you are basically transformed into a clone of other women in the church. And your true identity starts to be erased. It's like someone's taking an eraser and just erasing. And the longer that you stay, the more erased that your true identity becomes. Understandably, my husband did not want to stay in the church if I wasn't going to stay in it with him. He didn't feel comfortable staying. He didn't feel that we should be split apart. So he decided to leave with me. And we decided that we would just start looking for another church. Your situation might be a little more difficult if you have a spouse who is extremely invested in the church and they really want to stay. I'm going to give you 3 different pieces of advice. Those of you who have not yet told your spouse that you want to leave. Those of you who have told your spouse and your spouse agrees. Those of you who have told your spouse and your spouse wants to stay. So let's start with those of you who have not told your spouse yet. You need to tell your spouse that you are not comfortable in the church and that you really want to leave. Their reaction is not your responsibility. The way that your spouse decides to react, however way they're feeling, whether it's in a positive or a negative way, is not your responsibility. You cannot allow other people's emotions and reactions to dictate how you feel in that current situation, and you cannot allow it to allow you to pull back from your decision. There are times in our life where we have to be selfish, because if we're not selfish, we will always be a people pleaser, and we'll never do the things that we want. We'll never fulfill ourselves, and we'll never be happy. The problem when it comes to the ICOC is that we're taught to be a people pleaser. We're taught to say yes, yes, yes to everything. And we're taught to totally ignore our own feelings, to disregard what we want, how we feel, our own gut instincts, and we just go along with what everyone else says. When it comes to marriage, if you're a wife, you're taught in the ICOC to be submissive, to honor your husband. Don't get me wrong, I agree with submission and honoring. However, in the context that the ICOC puts it, I totally disagree with, because that method does not work at all. That method only works for those who want to stay in the church. What I would do is calmly just tell your spouse, we need to talk, we need to have a serious conversation. This is how I feel. Now, I don't want this to hurt our relationship. This is no kind of reflection on you. I don't want anything to damage us. I also don't want us to fall apart because of this. But this is how I feel, and I'm not happy, and I'm very uncomfortable. I would be happy if we can just maybe possibly seek out other options when it comes to finding another church that we can both be comfortable in. I know it sounds easier said than done, but guys, what other choices do you have to make? And you have to start by opening up and being 100% honest with your spouse and telling them exactly how you feel. And don't hold back. Now, for those of you who have told your spouse and your spouse wants to leave with you, you have it the easiest. Not too many people are in a relationship where they want to leave and their significant other agrees to it so easily and is like, yeah, sure, let's go. But if you're one of those lucky ones, then now all you have to do is focus on constructing your relationship, especially if you're married. Because when it comes to the ICOC, marriages are never private. It's never confidential. It's always between you, your spouse, God, and then the rest of the church. Our discipling partners get involved. The leaders get involved. People that call themselves our friends get involved. It's different if you involve people into your personal relationship for advice or for suggestions because you want to speak to them. It's your choice. So now you know you want to leave. Your spouse agrees. They want to leave as well. Now you work on your relationship. Work on learning how to solve problems together without always having to involve the rest of the world. Work on loving each other. Work on having respect for each other. Work on whatever you need to work on. And if everything was working well in the ICOC, then just work on continuing to keep it that way. Even after I left and my husband left and he agreed to leaving, we still had difficulties. We still had issues, mainly because when I left, my faith ended up leaving as well because I was so affected and hurt by the things that happened when I decided to leave. Me and my husband had to learn how to solve problems on our own. We had 2 of our most closest friends who were also married, and I was totally fine with that because those are the only 2 people that to this day I still trust. But we had to learn how to really do things together and how to get through issues together and not to always feel like we had to rely on other members who we think is above us. Our differences kind of started to collide too because while my husband still was very faithful and very much a believer in Jesus Christ and Christianity, I started to waver off a bit because I started to just see things in a whole new way, and I enjoyed seeing perspectives in a different way and appreciating different religions and not feeling so restricted to just call myself a Christian only. So for those of you who told your spouse that you want to leave and they do not want to leave, this will be your time when you're going to know whether this is going to make or break your relationship. Now, this is strictly my opinion only. You can take it or you can leave it. If you're in a relationship and you decide to leave a cult or a religious group, and your spouse decides to stay, and your relationship is falling apart, you can only do but so much as the husband or as the wife. You can try your hardest, you can work super hard and keep it going. But if that other person is so indoctrinated and so brainwashed, that is bound to affect your relationship no matter what you do. Try your best. Try your best to keep your marriage intact. Try your best to keep communication completely open between you and your spouse. This doesn't mean that you have to make communication about you, your spouse, and the other members. This means that it's specifically just between you and your spouse. And your spouse has to respect the fact that you do not want everyone in your business. As an ex-ICOC member, I can honestly tell you that you have every right to have your entire marriage to yourself. You have every right to only disclose the information that you choose to disclose and to whom you choose to disclose it to. You do not have to tell it to everyone just because they were baptized for 20 years and you've been baptized for 1 year. It does not matter how spiritually high they believe they are. You have every right to make decisions for you and for your relationship based on what you guys want, not what the church says that you should have. This is really difficult because you might possibly find yourself in a situation where your significant other is so indoctrinated and the doctrine is so deeply ingrained that they are against you just as much as the rest of the members are against you. You may find yourself in a situation where your significant other might just see themselves a little bit higher than you spiritually just because they're still in the church and you're not. You can only do but so much as one single person. So what I suggest is that you want to keep a relationship with God. What you do is you look for another church to go to. You continue to have your prayer times. Just continue to reach out to God and to just tell God what's going on. God knows exactly what's going on. You do not have to be a part of the ICOC for God to understand your situation. The ICOC doesn't have some special key that goes into a whole nother world where God is there and it's the only time that you can have any access to God. That's bullcrap. It's stupid. That's not how it goes. But I don't want to go off of the topic. I just want to stick to just pointing out the key factors, which is that you need to try your best to keep your marriage intact. And if your significant other is being persuaded so easily by the other members, you will have a very difficult time in keeping your marriage together. There have been marriages that have failed due to this, and mine was one of them that almost failed. If your spouse is still in the ICOC, he or she is most likely still being controlled and still being used as a puppet. And they will be told that they need to focus on God and not focus on you so much. I know this because when my husband and I weren't in the church and I was the one who was quote unquote falling away, my husband was told many things. He needed to focus on his own salvation and he couldn't allow me to stumble him. There's a lot that you can go into when it comes to this subject, and I don't want to overwhelm you with advice and with information, but just know the basics, and the basics is that the ICOC is very good at controlling relationships. They're very good at controlling people and emotions, and you need to try your best to keep yours intact. And now it's basically a fight for your spouse between you and the ICOC. At the end of the day, the most important thing is that you need to keep yourself sane. You need to keep yourself healthy, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally and psychologically healthy. And you cannot do that if you're giving in to people pleasing and you're giving in to what your spouse wants. Because sure, your spouse may want you to remain a part of the church, but how is that helping you? Does it really make any sense to stay a part of a church that you're not being spiritually fed and you're not feeling comfortable in if you're just doing it to make someone else happy? Meanwhile, you're miserable. But the whole time, the most important thing that people seem to forget is the whole reason that you're supposed to be going to church in the first place is for God. Hello, you're here for me, not for him, not for her, not for him, not for her, but for me. Instead, we spend years and years and years going through this crazy cycle like a hamster on a spinning wheel, going to a church that we're not comfortable in, that we don't feel we should be a part of, just so we can keep everybody else around us happy. So you have to do what's best for you, and you have to really make the decision on what you're gonna do and stick with it. If you need any more help on this topic, you need advice, send me an email, hbhl@yahoo.com, or you can just leave a comment down below. How did you handle leaving your controlling religious group or the ICOC as a married man or woman? I would love to hear your feedback, and I will see you in part 3 video where we'll be talking about the fear of leaving because of friends. I'll see you guys soon.